Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, figuring out how you can play only 6 shows per year, all within driving distance of your own house, or else a scrappy upstart, looking to book back-to-back 12-week tours, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every songwriter seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the last Friday of January 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Tucker who drove a Subaru Legacy that he inherited from his stepdad, and who was really into backpack rappers from Minneapolis, and who was always trying to sell you shots of Everclear that he had packaged in old Squeeze-It bottles. And old Tucker would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com and try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. That's the first Sunday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube. Head on over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name. Then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of every month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and capital to do that. And if you're not in a place to contribute in that way, it's totally understandable. There's still a couple ways that you could help us for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store. Or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I really hope that you dig this week's episode. Our guest this week originally hails from Milwaukee and is at the forefront of modern acoustic blues in America. Buffalo Nichols got his start as a sideman in bands around the Wisconsin hub, before focusing on his own project with original compositions. The legendary label Fat Possum made him their first solo blues signing in almost 20 years, and he now records for that Oxford, Mississippi outfit. He's appeared on WNYC's Soundcheck, and he has been featured as KUT in Austin's Artist of the Month. He's toured with the Drive-By Truckers and is set to head out on the road with St. Paul and the Broken Bones. NPR's All Songs Considered says that he's found a way to make a worn-to-the-cliched nub style fresh through his intimate vocal delivery and ace resonator guitar playing. Rolling Stone calls him a deft fingerpicker and slide guitarist and muted power singer. And the Austin Chronicle says that he lets his modern blues simmer and smoke. I got a chance to catch up with him on the phone last week and hear about his journey so far. It's great to have Buffalo Nichols on the podcast this week. Thanks so much for joining us. You grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. What did music look like around your household growing up?
Growing up, I guess it was, like any household, or the typical household, radio and MTV and I got 4 siblings and my mom, and everyone had their own musical taste and music collection. So it was just a little bit of, everything as far as contemporary music goes.
You were part of the MTV generation too. I think kids these days can't appreciate how big that was for people, like 30 to 45 these days, how huge MTV was.
Yeah, I think I got just the very tail end of it because I, grew up watching, I would wake up and go to school every day and watch 10 minutes of, music videos, and TRL was still a thing and all that. But then by the time I was probably in like late high school, it was all Teen Mom and Jersey Shore. It was over by then.
An epical cultural shift at that point, to be sure. So where were you? You had 4 siblings, you said. Where were you in the order of siblings there? Because I'm wondering how that played out with musical tastes.
I'm the second youngest. And then my youngest sister was born when I guess I was 5, so I was pretty young. So yeah, I've always kind of been second youngest. And yeah, for a while I looked to my older siblings to figure out what to listen to, and then it sort of became a thing where as we all got older, we were all sharing music. But early on, I was just, whatever they thought was cool, I thought was cool.
And did that shift at a certain point where you started to say to yourself, well, I like what my older brother's into here, but actually this is kind of what I'm getting down with now?
Yeah, I think that was actually by the time I was like 12 or 13, and I started getting into like really extreme, like heavy metal and death metal and hardcore punk, and that was the rift right there.
Who were you into on the hardcore punk side of things?
I'm trying to think of like the early days. Really, it started with like my sort of introduction to extreme music, which isn't that extreme, was sort of like the early 80s punk stuff. So like Black Flag and Bad Brains. And then from there, somehow it introduced me to Napalm Death, which is still one of my favorite bands. So once I got into grindcore, it opened up, and it sort of changed my taste. Like if you can listen to that, then you can listen to like a machinery malfunctioning and find something in it.
So I'm totally with you. I loved all those bands from the early 80s. I grew up in D.C., so it was just in the water around here. But I was never able to make the shift over to like the grindcore thing, because to me, it sounds like you just described it right there, like listening to heavy machinery. What drew you to that, do you think?
It's hard to say. I think also this is like, early 2000s, where you had this sort of, there was like the screamo thing and the post-hardcore stuff. So a lot of bands were trying to find that middle ground where you would have like, a sung chorus and then very heavy breakdowns and all these things. I think it just slowly opened me to heavier and heavier music. I think you have to just sort of like slowly acquire the taste for it.
What do you think? Have you taken anything to your songwriting now that you gained from that period that you wouldn't have otherwise brought into it?
I think the biggest thing that I took from that was the sort of sense of urgency and, not really wanting to waste people's time. I remember going, you go to see a show and the band set is 12 minutes. And it's like, yeah, that seems about right. That was all they needed. So, and I also started listening to, different bands, metal bands specifically that make 15-minute songs. So I ask for patience from listeners, but I also sometimes feel like, I'm not going to take too much of your time. Here's a 24-minute album, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Well, you're speaking my musical love language there. Cause I love brevity, in work. I had a buddy of mine who he claimed the best way to start off a song was just by going, well, and then I won't go that far, but yeah, fair enough. So when did you go from a music fan to picking up an instrument yourself and saying, hey, this could be something that I make myself?
That must have been, I think, I really don't remember because it was just, well, the story goes that my sister had an acoustic guitar sitting around the house and she kind of set it down after a while and I just picked it up. So there wasn't like an aha moment for me. It was just like, every once in a while I'd go mess around on it. And then kind of before I knew it, it was starting to make sense. So it wasn't really, it took about a year of just like messing around on the guitar before I was like, maybe I can make music with this. It was just a thing. It was like a toy almost.
Yeah. I think I read somewhere in an article about you that you'd listen to songs over and over again to figure them out.
Yeah, because I never had lessons, and again, this is one of those. I caught the tail end of maybe just because we were poor, but we didn't really have internet growing up,
Yeah.
so there wasn't a lot of. And this is also before like YouTube and before you could just find people to teach you things on the internet. So, and I didn't know how to read music or anything, so the only way to learn a song was just to keep listening to it. And the heart of this. Also, I think that's the great thing about being a beginner and not having any outside influences is you can't really tell how hard a song is. You just keep trying it until you learn it. Yeah.
You only identify it by either I like this song or I don't like this song, and if you like
Exactly.
it, I think the cool pre-internet thing about that too is you'd have to. I learned in a relatively similar way, listening to the radio and trying to pick stuff up. Is you learn in this really idiosyncratic way where you're trying to copy whatever the artist does that you love, but inevitably you can't copy it exactly. So you have to kind of cheat your way into doing it, and you kind of develop your own language at a certain point.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about learning by ear, like to the radio and to records as opposed to video, is that if you can't see how they're doing it, then you have to really use your imagination to figure out how it's being done. And you might do it in a totally different way, but if you can make that happen, then it becomes yours,
I've never thought about it before, as you just put it there, the key being the visual part of it. That's really insightful. I don't know quite what that means, but you're right. There is something about adding a visual element to it that really, and this is a bad analogy, obviously, but it really takes your eye off the ball in a certain way. Like if you're not just following your ear, and if it sounds good or if it doesn't sound good, you end up in really dicey territory really soon, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I've met many musicians in my life who have had to learn too late to rely on their ear, and I think you get a lot more patience from other people when you're young, when you're just figuring that stuff out. But when you're an adult and already establishing your career, I think people don't really want to sit around and wait for you to develop your ear.
No, not at all. So I believe you started, playing seriously in the church a bit with sacred music. Is that right? What was that experience like?
Yeah, that's a common misconception about me. I don't know. I don't know how that went down.
All right.
I have an idea, but
I read it on your website.
Yeah, it's the reality is that when I was about, maybe 17, I had already gone through my punk rock metal phase, and I just wanted to start playing with, I just wanted to try something different. And the main thing that was happening on, in the part of Milwaukee that I was growing up, like you pretty much had like sort of like clubs where, over 40 dress code clubs where people were playing jazz and R&B, and then you had gospel music. So those are kind of my two choices. And so I joined I never went to church and as a kid, and but I joined a like contemporary gospel band.
Ah,
So it wasn't really like there was the occasional Sunday service, but for the most part, it was just like going to different churches and just and playing, original songs or like contemporary gospel songs.
what did you pick up from the time in that band?
Well, that was really great because I was self-taught and sort of had this alternative music background, and then I would be playing with these guys and who were like my age and younger, who had been playing multiple instruments since they were 3, 4 years old.
Mm.
So I think what I learned was like, and they really didn't care about anything other than how well you could play, and they didn't have a lot of patience either. So I learned to just be quick and to just prepare before I get to the gig. That was the biggest thing, and also the importance of practicing. Like somebody who's playing drums better than I play guitar, but drums is like their fourth instrument. I'm like, oh, maybe I need to work a little
Yeah.
harder.
Yeah. Oh, there's that producer T-Bone Burnett who says you always want to be the worst guy in the band so that you're learning from other folks the whole time. Did you ever get chewed out for showing up and not being prepared enough or not catching on quick enough?
Yeah, it did. I remember somebody's mom who had driven them to the rehearsal. It was a dress rehearsal kind of thing. Was sitting out in the just watching the rehearsal, and I started playing, and she put her hands over her ear. She's like, "Tune your axe, man. What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh wow, nobody's ever yelled at me from the audience to tune my guitar." But yeah, after that, I was like, "All right, that was plenty embarrassing. I think I can try to not let that happen again."
Yeah, much less your bandmate's mom, man. That's brutal. Do you find yourself kind of bringing that preparedness now into your current project, or if you ever work with other musicians in the studio or live?
I really try to, but this is over 10 years now, so I think I try really hard to be prepared, but I also don't. Honestly, I don't put myself in those positions as much as I used to. I kind of show up to stuff that I'm used to more than not. But it's I think that's a great learning experience. New music and new people every week, which is what I was doing. I was like a hired gun at the time. So now doing the same thing every day it's pretty easy, relatively.
I know what you mean. There is something about your late teens and early 20s creatively where you're casting a wide net, but then I don't know what it is, but at a certain point when you find what your thing is and listeners start to respond to it, you find yourself focusing in. I think some people look at that as a bad thing. I look at it as a great thing, and it's a lot more of a comfortable place to be on a day-to-day basis playing music.
Yeah, I think I was always searching for that. I guess something like stability. Even as much as I love learning and having these different environments every day, I think where I'm at now is what I always really wanted out of music, which was, to get sort of through the early learning, because you never stop learning, but at a certain point you want to start taking what you've learned and applying it to your own, your own vision.
So when did that start for you?
I think it really started probably around 2015 was when I made the real shift from guitar player to songwriter. When I started, and that was also coincidentally the same time I started doing more folk music than anything else.
What do you think was drawing you to folk music at that point? I mean, 10 years earlier, you'd been into the grindcore that by your own admission, sounded like, a machine going wrong or something like that. And then folk music is so based around, just simple melodies and what you would just think of a stereotypical song almost being. What do you think was drawing you to folk music at that point?
I think the first thing was the fact that I started out on acoustic guitar, so everything that I was trying to play ended up sounding like folk music. But also, I think it was a necessity, really, because I got to a point where I was playing in pretty big bands, as far as like the number of people, like 7, 8, 9-piece bands, and I started traveling a lot. And I wasn't playing music, but I wanted to keep playing music, so the only thing I really could do was play acoustic guitar. And I just wanted to put the two together, which was like my love for being alone and my love for playing music. And it was the best genre for the job.
Yeah, man, I remember starting out in my early 20s and thinking about a lot of stuff. And I'm like, man, if I go this folk singer route, I don't have to worry about anyone showing up for practice, and I also don't have to pay anybody. I can keep all the money for myself.
In this economy, you got to think about that.
Yeah, in this economy, but every economy for creative music, man. I mean, there's never any money to make art. You know what I mean? Like, some people get to be Radiohead, I guess, but most people don't. And I think it really helps to be the ability to go solo when you need to. I think really helps you be able to stay in the game and create art over the long term.
Yeah, I think now that you say that, I think that was another big catalyst for me, was realizing, like, if I just keep being the guitar player in somebody's band, I'm always going to need someone else to give me that gig. If I can write playing guitar is a plus, but if you can write your own songs, I think you're kind of good anyway. You can be the source of the employment rather than relying on it.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the Internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. The distance between working on someone else's creative project and working on your own is an immense gulf. The trade-offs are obvious: security versus opportunity, a paycheck versus a payday, hitting a mark versus tapping a vein. But that individual creative journey begins first by clearing a space to let it grow, by removing other priorities, by clearing away other distractions, by declaring against all initial evidence that your own unknown creative voice is of greatest value. And there's a wonderful poem about the importance of making that space by the poet Wendell Berry. It's entitled, "Who Makes a Clearing Makes a Work of Art." Who makes a clearing makes a work of art. the true world's Sabbath trees in festival around it. And the stepping stream, a part of Sabbath also, flows past, by its fall made musical, making the hill slope by its fall, and still at rest in falling, song rising. The field is made by hand and eye, by daily work, by hope outreaching wrong. And yet, the Sabbath, parted, still must stay in the dark mazings of the soil no hand may light. The great life, broken, make its way along the stemmy footholds of the ant. Bewildered in our timely dwelling place, where we arrive by work, we stay by grace. That's it. So when did those first songs start coming out of you, and what was your kind of, looking back on it, what was your method for songwriting at that point?
At this point, around that time, 2015, I'm like 24 years old, I guess. I had been writing songs since I started playing guitar, but never took the time to actually craft them and do anything with them. Mm-hmm. Maybe, I can think once I turned like 18, 19, I started really working on songwriting, but I never felt comfortable enough with it. And then once I hit 24, I was like, all right, I've been doing this for like 10 years. I have to just start sharing it because I'll never be comfortable with it. And I'm still not, so I'm glad I did. Yeah. But my process was really, simple. I think the way for me to get past the sort of protectiveness I felt was to just write about things that were happening. So I went from less introspective and less sort of vague and poetic to just direct. And the songs from that time are really political for me because I think it just made sense. Like, write a song about something that's happening, sing it to people who see it happening. Because that was, I wasn't recording, it was just writing and gigging. So my process was just to think about the people who are going to hear this song next week, and it kind of made me feel like, all right, they're in the room with me writing, so I don't have to be embarrassed when they're in the room when I'm singing it.
So where did you first start sharing those songs, and what was it like? Do you remember the first time that you shared a song like that?
Yeah, I think this was like, in Milwaukee when I was just playing the bar scene, the folk bar scene. And yeah, I think it was it all happened pretty quickly. I wish within like a year of me taking it seriously, I was like, getting recognized from the scene and, local media. So I got a pretty immediate response, and it was overwhelmingly positive. So that was kind of it for me. I just decided, at that point, songwriting was more important than guitar playing. And it's been that way for the last 5 years, 5, 6, 7 years.
What did that feel like after being, just another guy in the band for so long to being, recognized and put in the center of the stage like that?
It was a good feeling, and it was an important sort of shift for me because I never particularly enjoyed the social aspect of music. I would show up to the gig, play, and then, as soon as that last note is done, I'm already packing up. I was out of there because it was just like I was just looking for music to play, and I didn't want to hang out. I didn't want to do anything else. But once I became the songwriter and the front person or whatever, I could sort of, and in some ways, you get to dictate the atmosphere, and the environment was something that I enjoyed because I sort of set the tone, So I liked it a lot more than being in someone else's band.
It's funny you were saying starting out there in that Milwaukee folk scene, as you felt comfortable because as you were writing the songs, you felt like the listeners were in the room with you because you literally knew who you were going to be playing to. Fast forward 5 or 6 years, obviously your career's in a different place. You don't know who the people are going to be in the room when you go to play a gig next week or whenever. Have you have you tried to hold on to that technique as you've continued to play, or have you had to adjust your technique as you write?
I've tried, but it's definitely gotten more difficult because, yeah, like you said, the first probably 2 years, 98% of the people in the room were people who I knew and knew well. But now it's the opposite. It's always strangers, but there's always the opinionated people usually are not the most sensitive. So
Yeah.
You start to think about the guy who comes up to you at the merch table and tells you what he thinks about your song, and it just, I mean, for me at least, it starts to get to my head. So now I've kind of gone a totally different way where I just write for myself,
Yes.
which is, I think it's made me a different songwriter, and I think it's, I don't want to say better, but I feel like it's a sort of more mature now that I can let my own thoughts fully mature before I share it with people. Before I was letting people in a little bit too early, I think.
Yeah, well, I feel like there's such a major difference between being in a community playing songs for people that you know and that you're going to have a beer with after the show or a coffee with the next day, that and like some rando going off on it like a YouTube comment. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's just something so disembodied about that. And so, the older I get with music and listening to what people have to say about my own stuff, the more that I just have gotten to the point where I have to always remind myself, consider the source. Consider the source. And all sources are not created equal. The drunk guy at the merch table is different than, the producer you've been working with for 4 years who loves you and really cares about your music and knows the journey you're on. Like, those two opinions aren't equal, but sometimes it can feel like, as the artist, it can feel like those two things are flattened and that those two opinions hold equal weight.
Yeah, I think I really have struggled with that, and I still do. You don't want to. I've talked about this with a lot of people, but you don't want to let the detraction and the negativity affect you. But I think the same part of your brain that blocks that out will also not allow you to fully appreciate praise.
Well, there's a double-edged sword if I've ever heard of one, right there.
Yeah.
It's really true. It's really true. Because sometimes people will come up to me and they'll try to give me a compliment. I'm just realizing this now as you mentioned that, but it's so weird. Yeah, like I've become a ninja at just being like, cool, thanks very much, and just like, moving on, like not taking it in.
I don't know how to because you know somewhere deep in your heart where these people are coming from. Like you say, consider the source. And, some people are more careful about it than others, but at the end of the day, I think when you sit down to write, it's really impossible. And I'm only speaking for myself, but for me, it's impossible to not let other people pop up in the room when I'm writing. And I wish I could figure out a way to just not care. And saying that you don't care is a good first step, but it doesn't really get those people out of your head.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's the closest I can get to it when I'm there is just to think to myself, not whether someone's going to like it or hate it, but just thinking to myself, probably no one's really going to listen to this besides like my mom and 70 other people anyway. So it's all right.
Yeah, that's a good tactic. I'm gonna use that one.
How have you navigated the business end of music over the last 5 years? Obviously, your career has progressed well beyond just trying some things out at a the bar scene, the folk scene in Milwaukee. So, how have you navigated that landscape and made it your career?
I'm not sure. I think early on it was pretty simple. Not necessarily easy, but everything was logical. Like I had a sort of system where it's like, okay, I can do this much touring, playing original music, and then, I had a pretty well-established place in the Milwaukee scene where I could get, the decent festival gigs, and and then you do the occasional wedding and corporate gig to keep things going. But that after a couple of years of that, I realized that it was sort of just keeping me afloat, and I wasn't really, it's harder to move forward when you have to spend half of your year, learning a 3-hour set for someone's birthday or whatever. So I think there was a point where I just decided to focus on, my sort of, it wasn't really my original music, but focusing on Buffalo Nichols. And I started leaning into social media and stuff like that, which I think gave me this appearance that I was, serious about something. And that kind of brought a lot of the opportunities that I'm enjoying now. But as far as like the business, that's something that I've always struggled with because I don't like anything. It's always been this way. I don't like anything about the music industry other than the music. So it's tough.
Yeah. It's funny because we're also coming to it at a time when it's like I can understand in the 80s and 90s why people would hang around the music business and deal with all the BS because there was so much money then. But it's like, wait, you expect me to hang around the music business now and I could still make more like being the manager of a Jiffy Lube right now? Like, dude, F this. I don't want to deal with this. But, you do it because you love it. It's funny that you mentioned social media there because that is such a critical tool. And it's a tool that I misunderstood when it first came out. When it first came out 10 or 12 years ago, like my career basically started before, Twitter and Instagram and all that. And so then it came along and I totally misunderstood it as a fad. I was like 28 years old and already like a grandpa, like this is bullshit. It's not going to be around in 10 years. I was totally wrong. But I think what I misunderstood about it is it's such a beautiful micro medium for reaching people. And people, you can still get across what you want to get across without being completely consumed by it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's been able to pull that off. Easier said than done kind of thing.
It does. That's a really good point. And the people who have pulled it off are people who were really, really big before social media came out, and then they can just have, like their team post stuff for them and they don't have to do anything or deal with it themselves. But
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
When I first started really trying to, because I was a little bit late on stuff too, like, I use Facebook because that's how the world connects, but I was really late to Instagram. I just wasn't interested in it until I started using it for music. And, at the time it was, this was 2017 probably. I was late to the game, but it seemed like this new fun thing to me. And I really leaned into it. But then at a certain point I felt like I didn't enjoy it. And I still really don't. And my social media, my Instagram, well, all of it is pretty inconsistent. And there's a lot of stuff that my management posts because especially now that I'm, putting out music and performing a lot, I think there's a lot of expectations that you're going to share things. And I still feel like I do all my sharing in my music. Like you don't need to know anything more about me than what I've given you. Like that was hard for me to do. And now I have to, tell you my deepest, darkest thoughts every day or every week. I don't feel comfortable with that. I know you don't have to do it that way, but I think that's what is expected. And I'm not ready for that.
And that's definitely like what gains traction with people too. Yeah, no, I know what you mean, man. Like I'm old school in that way where I'm just like, well, the really serious stuff that I think that's personal and really deep and dark or political and whatever, like I've put that all in the song and I'm kind of a boring person outside of the music and you don't necessarily need to hear what this boring old dude has to say, except, I've really thought about it. I've thought about how it goes into the songs, and I haven't just thought about how I'm going to go spout off right now.
Yeah, that's exactly the issue, and why I've fallen away from it. There's people talk about curating your Instagram or your Twitter or whatever, but it's weird for a songwriter or any kind of musical artist to be expected to do that because the curated version of yourself is your work. It's your album and it's your stage presence. So now you have to create a second persona for everyone else to consume for free 24/7. It's too demanding.
Keyword free. That's the major problem. If it paid, I bet we'd both be on that thing all day. You better believe it. Man. So what are you working on now? You're down in Austin, Texas now. How have you found Austin? I lived down there for 7-8 years. How do you like it down there?
It's weird for me being, a 30-year-old introvert. I've been here for a year and I still haven't really gotten out too much, especially in the pandemic and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. That's all I know about Austin is that there's these four walls. Yeah.
Well, but fair enough. And are you working on a new record right now, or where are you at in the album cycle?
I feel like I'm always working on a new record perpetually, but I mean, my first solo album came out in October? Yes, October 2021. So I'm still, pretty deep into that cycle. Yeah, I don't know when I'll get to do another one, but I'm always writing. I have a couple albums worth of material right now, so I'm just waiting for the right time.
Thank you so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter Podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Buffalo Nichols' self-titled debut album is available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.